Since this list mostly consists of animated movies, this is what my animated self would look like. If only I was this good looking in real life. What's up, everybody? Well, the last movie slash show themed video I made was top 5 best TV shows of all time. And for my standards, it's relatively popular with about 300 or so views. And yeah, why not do the exact counter opposite by making a video that is comprised of the top 10 worst movies of all time? And with that, let's get into it. Number 10, The Emoji Movie. This movie has been panned by pretty much everybody. And while I don't think it's a truly horrendous movie like some of the movies I'll get to later on this list, this movie is just forgettable, and that's, I think, one of the biggest sins that a movie can take, is that it's ultimately just a forgettable experience all around. And this movie is pretty much the same thing. I watched it for the first time about 5 years ago with our babysitter, and I remember little to nothing about it. And I was reminded about this movie by the internet and how badly it has been panned since its release. Number 9, The Return of Jafar. This movie is truly awful in terms of its animation, but it's not as bad in terms of animation as some of the ones we'll get to later on this list. But this one is still really bad, and there are a lot of problems with this movie. The story is not that interesting to follow along. The actor who replaces Robin Williams does not even come close to replicating Robin Williams' charisma and acting. And Iago is reduced to nothing but a good guy who is used in a heroic light, and he's just not interesting. He's just annoying during the whole movie. And I think this one is higher on this list than the Emoji Movie because while it is forgettable like the Emoji Movie, it also suffers from having worse animation than the Emoji Movie does. Speaking of which, number 8, Beauty and the Beast, Belle's Magical World. When you want to talk about bad animation, let's talk about Belle's Magical World, because this movie's animation is truly horrendous. I mean, you probably took like 3 looks at those shots and said, yeah, I probably agree with you on this one. And there's not really a whole lot to say here. The story is a jumbled mess of just Beast and Belle arguing for an hour and a half. And there's not really much to say about how terrible this movie is. It's kind of gone under the radar as a terrible direct-to-video sequel, but I think at this point, nobody really wants to watch it, and for good reason. Number 7, Jonah, a VeggieTales movie. Okay, now we have to rant on VeggieTales. I like VeggieTales, or I used to anyway. I grew up watching this show from the ages 2 to 5, absolutely loving it, thinking it was the most perfect thing ever. I think almost to 10 that was the case. But I've realized that this show is kind of stupid as I've gotten into my teenage years and kind of talks about some very basic Christian ideas. And I think this movie is just the same, really, in most ways. The songs are really stupid as well, and I don't really like the songs. The ending song's not that good, the beginning song's not that good. The whole point of how they got to the point where they're listening to that song is interesting, but kind of poorly animated. And you're kind of seeing a theme here with these poorly animated movies. This one's not terrible in terms of animation, but it's not great either. It's like mediocre. And that's really all I can say on this movie in terms of its quality. And yeah, on to the next one. Number 6, Luca. I don't know why, but this movie offends me a lot. I'm not Mexican and all that, but this movie has so many stereotypes. Like when it comes to bullies and parents and it just not really worth watching in my opinion. I think that it's not a good movie overall, and the punchline Silencio Bruno just aggravates me every time I hear it for some reason. It just makes me so angry for some reason. But if you like this movie, that's alright. It does have pretty good animation for a bad movie. Number 5, Chicken Little. Okay, we're back to bad animated movies. Chicken Little is another poorly animated mess, but this time it's from Disney. Well, Disney has been on most of this list so far, so that makes sense. But Chicken Little is truly horrendous in its 3D animation. And you could take 3 or 2 looks at this animation and probably agree with me on this one. It's truly awful to look at. And the story itself is just forgettable, and the characters are not likable. The main character is just bullied throughout the entire movie by the characters for saying that the sky is falling. And the whole alien invasion sky is falling second half storyline is just not interesting. And that's really all there is to say here. It's another forgettable mess. Number 4, A Car's Life, Sparky's Big Adventure. Yet another example of truly abysmal animation. And this time, it looks like just a bunch of paint was splashed onto a screen and moved around to look like cars that move like slime. This doesn't really look like real cars at all. Cars don't really do backflips unless you're a video on the internet for some reason. And I just don't like this movie. It's awful. The script is awful. The voice acting is awful. And the special effects are awful. And there's not really anything to like about this movie. I hope we're not going to see any more horrendous animation. Number 3, Mulan II. Alright, let's take a quick break from horrendous 3D animation and talk about Mulan 2, which is one of the worst Disney movies I have ever seen. Probably the worst Disney movie I will ever see. This one is so bad because it's not entertaining whatsoever. The subplot is not good at all. I don't care about the other characters and their relationships. And the whole movie is brought down by the constant arguing of Mulan and Shang, coupled together with the fact that the biggest sin that this movie takes is taking our favorite character from the last movie, Mushu, and making him the least likable character and making him the villain. It is a sin in every single aspect. This movie forever has all of my hatred. The character arc for Mushu is terrible, and that's really all I can say on this movie. Is this just a mess outside of its mediocre animation? Number 2. Oh no! Ratatouille. Well, we're back to horrendous 3D animation. What is there to say here? This movie is awful. This one probably has the worst animation we've seen on this list so far, and that is saying a lot. This movie is truly awful on all fronts. The character models look half finished. The characters' mouths move up and down without any rhythm. They don't match the words at all. They don't look anywhere close to realistic, and it's just a mess. The animation is horrendous. The whole movie really is a mess. The climax is a mess. Everything in this movie is a mess. The voice acting is okay at best, but it's truly an awful movie that I had the unfortunate privilege of seeing. And yeah, on to number one. And finally, number one, The Last Airbender. How fitting that we ended our last video with the best TV show of all time, Avatar: The Last Airbender. And we end this list with the worst movie of all time, The Last Airbender. This movie is a disgrace to the Avatar name on all fronts. There is exposition every single scene. It's super unnecessary. The special effects are awful. They don't match the choreography. Everything is super slow in comparison to the movie. There are so many things missing from this movie. This movie is truly awful on all fronts. The acting is terrible, and I am just. I have no words to describe this movie. It is truly awful to go from a masterpiece like this to this. How in the world is this even possible? How do you botch up Avatar this badly? I watched half the movie and rage quit. It's truly awful on every single front. The effects are awful, the acting is awful, the directing is awful, everything. Everything else on this list is animated, but live action once again takes the cake. And that's really all I can say on this movie. But what do you think are the top 10 worst movies of all time? Let me know down in the comments. How would you do this list differently? And with that, peace!